Hey, beautiful people. I want to share this beautiful birth story with y'all today because it is one that most of us are not going to hear that often because it doesn't happen that often, just because of the medical community and just other communities that are not necessarily familiar with breech births. So, I have a special mama who I'm going to talk with today about her breech birth. Thankfully, I was able to play a part in it, but I'm excited because there's a lot of babies who, at some point in your pregnancy, will most likely be breech, and that's okay because your baby can flip and turn and may even turn like at the last minute. And then there's some babies who don't turn and they just find a very comfortable position in your body in a breech situation. And so what do you do when you have a breech baby? Do you still have a vaginal birth? Do you have to go get a C-section? There's so many different conversations out there. So I wanted to just bring this one to light because it is still possible to have a breech baby vaginally, naturally, and unmedicated. And I want to just shed light on that and bring more awareness to that. So I'm going to bring this mama on and also, of course, ask all of the questions that y'all have, and we will just kind of chat. For those of you who have seen breech births, yes, they are so beautiful. They're really not like much different than a normal birth. They don't have to be, at least, but you have to have, people in a birth team who knows what they're doing. So I am going to find this mama on here and have her join me live once I see her. Hold on. All right, let's see. Y'all know how this is for me sometimes. It always takes forever for me to actually get the person connected. There we go. Let's see. Yay!
Oh, there we go.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm so excited for you to share your story.
I know, me too. It's amazing story, and I'm excited for people to hear. So,
Yay! Well, y'all, this is Lauren. I'm going to let her introduce herself. So if you just want
yeah,
to tell everybody who you are, when you had your baby, and then,
yeah,
of course, we'll learn about your whole birth story, but whatever you want to share.
yeah. No, awesome. So I'm Lauren. I'm a first-time mom. I was expected on November 3rd, and my little baby came on Halloween. So, first-time mom, little girl named Lily. She's napping right now with Dad. So, but yeah, we had quite the story with we were going to do a birthing center natural route, and babies have a mind of their own, so we're here to
Yes.
kind of share my adventure with that. So yeah.
Yay. Okay, well, let's just jump in because
Okay.
I know that for so many women who may have had breech babies or have breech baby right now,
Yeah.
they just don't know what to do, and sometimes it
Mm-hmm.
can get scary and overwhelming. So let's start from the beginning.
Yeah.
You said your plan was to have a natural unmedicated birth at a birth center. Start there because
Yeah.
obviously we didn't know your baby was breached that early.
Exactly.
So what made you choose the birth center route over the hospital?
Yeah, so I think for me personally, so I actually had an ovarian cyst that I had to have removed surgically in 2018. So my experience with that OB, it was good she removed it, but at the same time, just my experience with the OB in the hospital was I was just treated like another number, the type of care that I had. I reacted poorly to the anesthesia. They were trying to rush me out of the hospital, and I left that experience with a very bad taste in my mouth. And so I knew if I wanted a child that, at least for me personally, I wanted just a different type of care. And so I had a coworker who had gone the birthing center route, and I wasn't even convinced I wanted unmedicated at that point. I just knew that I wanted a different type of care when it came to when me and my husband were going to start trying. And so then I found the birthing center that, you know, I was with, and then everything kind of aligned from there. But that was my kind of first experience into hospital and why I chose that route. So.
Yeah, yeah. So talk to us about like the pregnancy journey. When did
Mm.
you realize that baby was breech?
Yeah.
Did she ever turn after you found out she was breech? Like, how did that whole thing start?
Yeah. So, and it's funny is, you know, I'm kind of a perfectionist and I followed everything to a book with this pregnancy, right? And then when it came to about 32 weeks, she was frank breech. So at 28 weeks, she was head down, sunny side, or she was transverse. And then 30 weeks, she was head down, sunny side up. And then she was frank breech from then on, 32 weeks until I delivered. So, and there were times where I thought that maybe she had moved. If people aren't familiar with frank breech, the baby is butt first and the legs are essentially in front of the head. She was
Mm-hmm.
holding her legs. And because I felt kicks at the top, it was confusing, right? And I was, you know, kind of misunderstanding her head from her butt, and thought, you know, she had flipped sometimes, but she just kind of stayed there at the frank breech position and got really comfy.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, she did. And so when you realized that she was breech, frank
Mhm.
breech around 32 weeks, did it make you nervous? Were you kind of like, it's not a big deal, we still have plenty of time?
Yeah, see, it's really interesting because, like, so my midwives were really good about giving me like a protocol to kind of start doing things to help her, encourage her to turn at the 32 weeks. And if you talk to anyone who has a breech baby at 32 weeks, you have tons of time, right? Lots of babies turn from 32 to 36, and there's tons of babies that turn from 36 even to within labor, right? So, you kind of have to have this nice balance of like starting to do things to help encourage, but also not stress yourself out because
Mm-hmm.
you have so much time and you just don't know when the baby wants to flip, right? So
Yeah.
I started kind of doing the protocol that they gave me, which included spinning babies, Moxa, the pulsatia, just things like that at 32 weeks. And then at 36, when she's like not moving, that's when I became like way more aggressive, like a couple hours a day. Just, I mean, I was doing everything, right?
You
And
were.
so, yeah, definitely. It was like, they told me to jump and I said how high. You know, I was wanting to give
Yeah.
her every opportunity that I could for her to turn, right? But I think it's difficult because you know, the babies have so much time to flip, but you also just don't know if they will, right? And I know, like with mine, she was never going to. So, and that
Yeah.
was just my case. And it's, you know, sometimes common and sometimes not. So,
So I think
yeah.
that what you brought up was really helpful is like you took the protocol that you were given and you kind
Mm-hmm.
of like took a lot of the stuff in your own hands.
Yeah.
You did a lot of spinning babies. You were doing, inversions, and you were doing, all like,
Pulsatia, yeah.
yeah,
I was doing
all of,
headstands in the pool. I was doing the breech tilt chiropractor pelvic floor PT. I was seeing since first trimester. So even outside of breech, I was already doing those things. So yeah, all the things they tell you to do, I was already in process or already was part of my pregnancy plan.
yeah. So do you feel like, because obviously I know because we talked
Yeah.
throughout your entire pregnancy, did you feel like that was overwhelming for you to literally be doing this stuff every single day? Like looking back now, would you have done the same things? Would you have maybe like eased up on it? Or
Yeah.
did you feel like this is what I have control over, so I'm gonna do this and I feel good about that?
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult question because I even, you know, have to pose that question to myself on like a future pregnancy, right? If I will be doing
Hmm.
that again. I know for me, it was like 7 weeks of exhausting myself, and I definitely think that was too much. At the same time, I was trying to like give myself every chance that she could to flip.
Hmm.
And so I think for moms who are having to go through it, I definitely think like, you should try it, because there's plenty of people who had success with the moxa. I also did myofascial release therapist. People had success with that. So I definitely think you should try them. But do you have to exhaust yourself to every end? No, because at some point the baby's going to flip or it's not going to flip, right?
Yeah.
And then I would say it also just leads us to another question, even reason why we're having this conversation, is that, women should have more resources and providers that if they're in the situation, the baby wants to flip, it flips. But if it doesn't, then, there was nothing wrong with my baby. It was just the position that she was in. And so then you turn into less providers who are trained in breech, and then providers who are willing to are usually trapped by insurance. And so you run into those two sides, right? So at least in my case, I will be having a contingency plan on my next pregnancy, because it was so stressful for me to go through. But I think for moms who are in it, it's good. If you're less than 36 weeks, my personal experience, do the things. If you're at 36 weeks, it's okay to make a phone call here and there to go ahead and have a backup plan. But as you'll find, my situation, we were in the middle of doing some aversions and things like that. So it kind of changed the timeline of mine a little bit. So
yeah, well, let's jump into that then.
Yeah.
So you did all the things, 36 weeks rolls around and she still franked breech.
Yeah.
And then what were because you were still doing all of the things that you already shared, but then we kind of took it up a notch and we're like, okay, what's the next thing that we can do? And what did you do? Share what you did, and then what that experience was like.
Yeah, so from when she was 36 weeks frank breech, I was still doing spinning babies, everything, just to make sure that I was still giving her like the best position to have her head tucked and things like that. And so I did 2 gentle versions with my midwives, which generally does work, where they go in and try to, do it on the outside, but it's not as intense as the aversion in the hospital with like an epidural. So we did 2 of those. She would go to transverse, but then she would just never go head down. And what you'll find in frank breech, it's typically a harder position to turn on the outside because of where their legs are at. But it's generally safer to deliver, right? Because they're butt first. So the gentle versions didn't work. Then I was referred to an OB to do the ECV version in the hospital. And the doctor I had was great. He actually they're generally recommended at 37 weeks. And my doctor wanted to do it at 39 weeks. So if she did flip, there was lesser of a chance for her to flip back, right? And then he also recommended the epidural. So I was like, relax as possible. And then given the instance that something did happen, if I had to go in a C-section, that I would already have the epidural. So, and that was interesting is, the epidural piece, it wasn't my ideal because I was going unmedicated, but at the same time, it was an epidural, not in labor, right? So it's much different than having an epidural in labor. And in my case, I think it was interesting to know what an epidural felt like, because I knew I didn't want that and I still didn't like it. So anyway, so we did the aversion at 39 weeks, like on the dot. Yeah. And so I did that in the hospital. And little girl got stressed out. She didn't, go into like full on, stress or anything like that, but the doctor had to stop, right? So it was like 39 weeks. And, I was also just going to say that I was supposed to be a really good candidate for the aversion, based on like my fluid, based on where the baby was positioned. She was like 35 percentile for her weight. My placenta was located in the back. I mean, everyone I talked to was like, this should work, right? And so, but yeah, it did not work. She got too stressed. And so I'm sitting there in the hospital room, like pretty much in tears that we had. And my husband was so supportive, but I mean, we had exhausted every option at that point. And I was 39 weeks. So I was like a week away from everything, right? And I think part of this journey is that like, I had to be so strong, because even when you're in the hospital, like I was in labor and delivery with that version, and they were like, we can schedule your C-section today. And it's like, in my mind, it's like, okay, I can get I can get some relief like right now, like I can end all of this craziness. But I also knew it's like not what I wanted, right? And it was
Mm-hmm.
too much to process. And I did have a really good doctor who was like, you know, you can let the epidural wear off and go home and go into labor naturally. And that's what I did, right? So a couple hours, we let it wear off. And then at that point, it was kind of like, okay, now it's game planning time because now the
Yep.
abortion has failed and I still have a breech baby at 39 weeks. So
Yeah. And I, you know, as your doula, I was just like, nothing about your, which is, I don't even know what it was, but
yeah.
and it for you too, it was like
Mm-hmm.
nothing, like no was never an option. Like
Mm-hmm.
the answer no was never an option for us,
Yeah.
but not in an ignorant way. Like
No.
not in a way of we're like, I'm gonna like do this because I want to do it and you're not gonna tell me anything otherwise. It was like a
Exactly.
confidence. It was just like, I'm very confident in this, and like the
Yeah.
answer is really not no. You know, it's like
Yeah.
just got to find the other option, right? Just got to
Yeah.
find the way, the route, the path
Mm-hmm.
that's going to work for us. And we did, you know, we were able to like problem solve, like you were saying, and
Yeah.
like go to the place that you wanted to go. So
Exactly.
we're 39 weeks now.
Yeah.
And for anybody listening, if you were in that situation, somebody may be like, look, you're 39 weeks, like maybe next time, and just kind of be
Mm-hmm.
like you were saying, just throw in the towel, like you've exhausted all of your options. But
Yeah.
we had one more option, like we literally had one more
Yes,
option left,
we did.
what was our last option?
Last option was to deliver breech vaginally and find a provider. And I think just like finding a provider at 39 weeks, like outside of the breech situation, is
Yeah.
probably a little unheard of. But that was our option that we wanted to exhaust before we even did C-section, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think something else I just want to notate for moms that, you know, outside of me trying to find another provider and going down this route, even moms who are doing unmedicated or out of hospital, whatever you choose, something that was just like so hard for me to go through that we had to constantly battle. And Janelle, I called you several times, is that, you know, you have so many opinions from friends and family. And you mentioned before that we didn't just like do blindly make this decision. Like I did my research and like I didn't go down Google rabbit holes. Like I went and I like, you know, did research studies and I looked at interviews from doctors who were trained in breech and like I assessed the actual risk. But I think that was so really difficult because I had
Mm-hmm.
family that was like, you're potentially putting this child at risk and, you know, they're not familiar with breech. And so even if you're going, I think if you go unmedicated or out of hospital, you're already getting those questions from family of like, what if this happens and what if you endanger your baby? And I think that was something my husband had to kind of help safeguard me when the version failed, because I told family like, hey, it failed, I'm not ready to talk about it right now, because I had so many opinions of like, why aren't you just doing the C-section, like why are you putting your baby at risk? And so I think it's really important that like part of our story was that like I educated myself and I knew what I was doing and the route that I was going, and I had to stand firm in that when it came to defending my decisions, right? And I think
Yeah.
every mom has to do that, whether your baby's breech or not. So
Yep.
just something super important.
Yeah, no, I love that you brought that up too, because I do think that whether your baby is breech or not, you know, just
Mm-hmm.
even having wanting to have a natural unmedicated birth, like you get a lot of
Why?
pushback from people, like,
Yeah.
you know, you don't get a gold star for that, or like,
Yeah.
you know, that like
We have modern
it's a
medicine. Yeah.
yeah, and it's like that's okay, you know, it's okay
Mm-hmm.
for us to have our preferences, and
Right.
you don't, like you were saying, like it's okay to just take some distance from those
Mm-hmm.
family members who just don't simply understand. It's
Yeah.
not necessarily that they're trying to like push back all of the time. It's just that they're not educated. And so
They
because
have
you
good
are,
intentions, but you have to like
exactly,
have boundaries for yourself. Yeah.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so we're 39 weeks and
Yes.
you had joined a breech community
Yes.
on
On Facebook.
Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And
One of
so
my
you,
midwives recommended the page to me, which was amazing, that they were when they knew I got to this point, they were in support of kind of giving me the resources that I needed, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
yes. So the Breech Page.
So we started there. So kind of walk us through like
Mhm.
how and when did you find a provider to take you on as a client at 39 weeks?
Yeah. So, and I think it's interesting is like my version failed. I'm wearing off the epidural, and Chanel, me and my husband call you, and we're like, we're in game planning mode, but we're also exhausted because this thing just failed. But I'm at 39 weeks. And so I think between the network and community that you had, the network that my midwives had, and then the Breech Page, you start looking at providers, right? And OBs that are trained. There's also the midwife route. Because of breech, a lot of them are having to not take insurance, so they want to do at home for breech, right? Which we just weren't comfortable doing that, especially given the first time mom, things like that. And so we ideally wanted an OB in the hospital. And so I started looking at the OBs around. And by the way, even in DFW, there's not a lot of them. And then on top of being trained in breech, you add first time mom onto that, and your like list is cut in half. And then I'm 39 weeks. So I mean, like all the odds were like against me, right? And so you'll see this term thrown around like proven pelvis. And so essentially as a first time mom, even if you're doing like a VBAC or whatever it is, like doctors want you to have a proven pelvis. It's easier for a baby to come out if one has come out before, right? Everything has been stretched. So we're calling up, I made calls to the OBs, and I got declined by all the ones I had called. And it was like, I was exhausted that day. I was like, okay, I'm going to go to bed and like retry this the next day. So that was Wednesday, 39 weeks, Thursday at 39 weeks. That morning I called one provider who his name was just mentioned. There weren't a lot of stories about like him doing breech, things like that. So, and every doctor's office, it's like, they want to get your records transferred. And I'm like calling, I'm like, I just want to know, will they take a first time mom at 39 weeks who is breech, all these criteria. And this doctor said he would take me, and he had an appointment at 1:30 that day. So it was just like trying not to get my hopes up. I was so excited. And so that someone would actually like meet with me, right? So I met with him, and he's just like a really great doctor. I would say, as any good doctor should, he was not like open arms with like first time mom breech. He was like, hey, these are the risks, these are the statistics. I'm trained in breech, and he essentially like let me make my own decision, which is like the sign of a good provider, right? That they educate you on the risks and the cons. And he was, trained in breech, which is the key here, right? Is that I wasn't going to go in with a provider who wasn't trained. But also, if you look at the criteria of like a vaginal breech delivery, your success of like a neonatal outcome, like a high success rate, is going to be that like your baby is over 37 weeks, that you have a provider trained in breech, that your labor is progressing, right? Which is what my doctor talked to me about. He was like, I need you to not be induced. I need you to go into labor spontaneously, and I need your labor to progress. So I was like an ideal candidate, right? And the Frank Breech presentation. So he walked me through all those things, and we kind of left with a consensus, that I would deliver with him. So I was so thankful. And I think that was like probably why I delivered so soon, because it was like 7 weeks of this weight just like
Yeah.
on my shoulders was instantly just like taken off in a matter of minutes.
Yep.
And so, so I was 39 and 1. I found a provider, and I guess we'll go into the next piece, but I went into labor that Saturday.
Yes.
So,
So let's talk about that. Let's just go through the whole birth story now. So you
yeah,
called me on Saturday. It was
yeah.
the day before Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you knew if you were in labor. You're like, I think I might be, but let's just talk. You can like literally go through your whole birth plan, or
Yeah.
not birth plan,
So,
birth story.
yeah, so it's pretty crazy is that, so Saturday morning, I started having some like, I would say like cramping, right? Menstrual cramping. So I took like an Epsom salt bath, and I'm like, okay, it's pretty mild. You know, it's could be. I'd had I had the what is it? I had pain in the round ligament pain like a week before, and so I just didn't know if it was like my body prepping for labor, that type of thing. So, but then we started to progress and things, normal labor signs that we talk about, mucus plug, bloody show, my water was breaking, things like that. And I think, Chanel, by the time I called you, my mucus plug had broken, but I'm still not having any contractions, which is the craziest part to my story, is that
Yes.
this intense cramping was going on my lower abs and then back as well. But every time it's like, am I having contractions or movements? No. And generally with contractions, you have them and then you get some relief. And I also was just not getting any relief. So I think some people got confused that my labor was just like super easy, and it was more of just like short and condensed, I guess you could say. And so,
Yeah.
but it was still, I mean, it's interesting enough is that like in early labor, you're told to sleep and get rest. And so I was trying to do that, but because of the cramping and kind of intense pain I was experiencing, I couldn't lay down. And so the only position that felt comfortable for me was sitting on the toilet on the squatty potty with having my legs raised, right? So
Yes.
interesting enough, like when I learned about labor positions, I thought I would try to sit there for a little bit to speed up my contractions. Little did I know that I would spend the entire day there because that was the most comfortable thing for me. But it was. So I think that's probably also why the labor went so quickly, because I just sat like that all day. So, so by the time I called you, it was like, what? Maybe 4 o'clock in the afternoon or something. And I was just getting uncomfortable. It was just like, I'm not getting relief. But we were still both like, well, there's no contractions. So, and you were like, do you want me to come over? And I'm like, yes, because it was just clear that we needed to start working through some things. So, yeah, and you can chime in too, but I think, you came over, and I think we also thought that potentially she was sitting on a nerve. And so it was really hard, but it was beneficial that we started doing some positions, right? Like inversions and lunges and rebozo and things to kind of help, which they did help. And by the same time, it's super intense while you're in it, right? But then, while we're there, it just, things started progressing more, right? Like I was throwing up, which is a sign of transition. And then I kept having the urge to bear down, right? Which is like pushing. And so I don't know if you want to add anything else, but I think essentially probably around like, was it 5:30 or 6 that I decided I was going to call the on-call line, right? Because at that point, those labor signs were progressing, and then I wasn't getting relief. And so I didn't know what type of relief I wanted. I just knew that like I potentially needed IV liquids or just something, right? Because if I was still in quote unquote early labor, this was like really intense. And so we called the on-call line, which is, given I've had one appointment with this provider, right? We didn't even make it to the follow-up. And he told me to call the on-call line. So really interesting piece of my story is that we call the on-call line, and the OB on call says, well, your doctor is not on call today, so you'll have to come in for a C-section. So between me, Chanel, and my husband, we are like, okay, we are right back on, on square one. And I'm so far into this labor, it's difficult for me to even process, right? I'm like, okay, we just got to get to the hospital and figure it out. And so they wouldn't give us the doctor's number, but they did tell us to go to the ER and that they could reach out to the doctor, right? And so we were kind of just in contingency planning at that point, right? So we decided, I think it went super quick, for my husband to just grab all of the bags and things that we had. We brought the squatty potty in the car. I mean, that was the only way I could make it through. And so then we go to the hospital at that point, right? So
yeah. Well, we actually didn't go immediately. So when we
Yeah, it was a
called the
couple
first
hours,
time,
right?
yeah, we waited a little bit of time because we thought that your water was breaking a little bit.
Yes.
And so they were like, well, your water has broken, so you need to come in right away.
Yeah.
And we were like, well, we know because, and you guys know because you're educated, like,
Yeah.
just because my water has broken doesn't mean I need to rush, right? I'm not
Yeah.
really at an increased risk of infection. And so I knew, even though we weren't having that contraction pattern, like I could tell because of your mucus plug, because of the
Mm-hmm.
blood, we kept seeing more and more bloody show, like as
It was
time
progressing.
progressed.
Mm-hmm.
We could tell like things were progressing, but we weren't at a place, you weren't really bearing down yet at that point. And
Yeah,
so
completely. Right.
we waited a little bit of time. And
Yeah.
then once we started to see more bloody show, and then you started to say, I feel like I need to bear down. I'm like, okay, all right, then
That's what we did,
it
yeah. And
might
the
be
water
time
was
to go.
breaking over time to it, right? It
Yes,
wasn't this like
it wasn't a big
big,
gush.
like
Yeah.
gush, exactly. And then I think by the time, even when we had decided to go to the hospital, that's when we saw the meconium
Yes.
as well, which was like a little alarming. But at the same time, like I personally grabbed my Doppler, checked her heartbeat, and I was like, okay, she's good.
Yeah.
But either way, we were on our way to the hospital, right? So
Yes. And so for those of you who have breech babies, if you do see meconium, it is like, you're like, whoa, wait, why is it brown now? Well, keep in mind, right, your baby's butt is first.
Yeah.
So if baby does
if they're
poop,
frank, yeah.
you know, that's what you're gonna see. Whereas like a head down baby who might poop, you're not gonna know necessarily immediately that baby could have pooped or has meconium in the fluids because their butt is up at the top, right?
Yeah.
So keep those things in mind too. Is like, it's not necessarily like, oh my God, we got to rush. There's a super large emergency. It just means like, hey, baby's low enough to where I'm seeing the meconium now.
Exactly.
So we're right there.
Yeah.
Okay, so we head to the hospital.
Yep. So we get there. It felt like a scene out of a movie, to be honest, because, you know, I have no idea how far along I am, but I am like, it's very intense, right? I can't, like, even to walk from point A to point B, I'm like, deep breath, go. Like, you know, it's very intense at this point. And so, you know, it just felt like a movie because we get to the ER and the lady's like, what's your name? What's your insurance? And I'm like, I need to talk to someone, you know. It just, they kind of felt the urgency of like, okay, like clearly she's, you know, you know, needs to talk to a doctor, right? So we go back to like the little clinic in the ER, and of course I get the lovely OB that I called prior and who told me that she needed to do a C-section. So she checks me to see how far along I am, and I am 9 centimeters dilated. I think Chanel, my husband, calls you, was like, this escalated so quickly, and you know, I know that you're coming in, and we figure out that I'm that far along, right? And so they obviously aren't gonna, they're waiting to put me up into labor and delivery. And I mean, this, in my personal experience, this doctor was not trained in breech, right? And so she sat me there when I was 9 centimeters, and she said, hey, I'm not gonna pressure you either way, but if I deliver your baby, then like there's a really good chance of head entrapment and that your baby's gonna die. And she told me this at 9 centimeters. And of course, like, I think it was just so important that like I did my research on head entrapment and the risk. And I'm 9 centimeters, so I'm not gonna have an argument with her. And literally my response was like, can you call my doctor? Because, you know, I wasn't asking her to deliver my baby. If she had to deliver my baby, I would have done a C-section because she wasn't trained in breech. And I think that's what, you know, maybe some doctors misunderstand, is that like I'm educated and I'm not willing to do something to put my baby in harm's way, but I'm also educated enough to know my options, right? And so I think that was kind of like, and then again, I'm in this intense state of labor. So anyway, so they bring me up to labor and delivery. They called my doctor, and he came in no problem. So, you know, we literally had no issues, and it was amazing. And so by the time he came in, then that's, you know, I'd already talked to my doctor about letting me labor in any position that I wanted. And then because in my circumstance, because of frank breech, he already told me that he was going to use forceps, which was something that we, you know, evaluated. But I think for me, it was kind of like forceps or C-section were kind of my options,
Yeah.
right? But he was trained in forceps, so that was a risk I had to look at. And because of that, he wanted me to just push on my back at the very end. So, so we stayed in labor and delivery, and Chanel, we did all the positions, all the things to get, all the things that you talk about to get the baby down, right? So, my husband was like super supportive and a big part of my labor process. Like, you snap some pictures where like I'm leaning back on him in the hospital bed, I'm leaning back on him on the stability ball. We did the peanut ball, we did the hospital bar with, I was doing high knees standing in the bed. I mean, we were doing everything to get the baby down.
Yep. And we
Yeah.
weren't doing it that long. I mean, obviously you were at nine
No, it was a
centimeters.
couple of hours, an hour, like 2 hours maybe, I think.
Yeah. It was pretty quick. And then you started pushing.
Yes.
And then, so you had like, I feel like for the most part, I feel like you had pretty good support of what it is that you know, wanted, and they were very supportive of like the movements that we were doing.
Yes,
And
they were.
which is very interesting too. Like,
the nurses were helping a lot, which was great.
yeah, but you were much more, because you know at home you were just comfortable in the squatty potty, like on the toilet. But then when we got to the hospital, you were like squatting and lunging and, you know, curb walking and doing all these things, and you could move around more, which was really great towards the end.
Yeah.
And so then we could tell like, okay, you're pushing. I think the one interesting part is because you weren't having like these traditional type contractions, you had to really kind of it was a very different experience pushing for you, because whereas most women would push with their contractions, you didn't have this urge of like, okay, we're going up on the wave and then the wave is coming down. So you had to do a lot of work to just like really be in tune with your body on pushing
and like knowing my exhaustion of like, you know, which is why I think like I exhausted myself a little bit at the end, because I could just theoretically push whenever I wanted to push. And so it was just like push, take a breather, push, take a breather. And I think all of you were encouraging me, like when I was pushing, to like, okay, do 15 seconds, now try 20 seconds, right? That we were just like pushing the line essentially to see like how far I could go. But yeah, it was very different in that sense, but I also didn't know anything else. So, you know, it like worked out. But yeah, so then we get, and something I just want to notate as we talk about like the first time mom, you know, they talk about labor progressing, and I think like the pelvic floor PT, the chiropractor, I did red raspberry tea, a leaf tea, and the dates, and then as well as exercising. So like I also knew that, you know, if you are a first time mom, or even if you're pregnant, those are things that you can do that obviously my labor did progress very quickly. So I think that was something else that I know contributed to those things progressing, which was my key as a first time mom, right? That it had to continue and move along, which it did. So
it did.
It did.
And so then tell us the end. Tell us how it ended.
So we're ready to push, and I'm ready to push in this nice, quiet labor and delivery room. And in case this ended in a C-section, they're like, we're going to take you to OR. So I get put in the bed, wheeled into OR. Chanel, I don't know how many people, maybe 15, 20. It felt like a lot. It felt like a lot of people. Between pediatric, the lovely OB who scared me got to see me deliver, which I thoroughly enjoyed because it was successful. And so anyways, it just room full of people. And and then we started to push, and I don't feel like it was very long.
No,
once the butt came out, right, it's butt, then legs, and then the head. I mean, everything just came out very quickly. And so, and in my opinion, I don't even think that we needed the forceps. She like was shooting out, but at the same time, she came out and she was healthy, and it was wonderful. So
it was.
Yeah, and it was just like, you know, you go through so much, and like to have that at the end and to have a healthy baby, it was like just amazing experience. And and then I did it all unmedicated. Like, it's, you know, encouraging moms who are wanting to go this route. I think what's interesting is I thought the pushing would be painful because that's what people like you see in the movies, and that's what people tell you is like, oh, when you push, that's going to be painful. And pushing felt like everything else that I had felt during labor. And it really just felt like I was running a marathon, right? Like it didn't feel like this super painful thing that I couldn't handle. It was just like a long marathon of doing the things, right? And by the time you push your baby out, it's like amazing, and your recovery is amazing, and you're in this
Yep.
present state. And so I mean, I loved it. So
You did so amazing. I mean,
yeah.
I just like watching, because like that was my first breech experience. And so, you read about these things and you study them, but until you're watching it happen, or you see other people's videos, right? But until you like are literally watching it happen, you're like, this is birth. Like this is birth, because literally every odd was stacked against you from the beginning, right? We were super confident. We prayed. We moved. We did all of these things that were just like allowing us to keep this really calm environment. Because any stress, because like even in that moment, right, when we all went to the OR, just in case, right? I think the other thing too is like the type of confidence that you had, even when they were rolling you into the OR for the just in case, right? Like you still, in those moments, you have to still trust yourself, and you still have to be confident.
It didn't even faze me. I was just like, okay, they're moving me to another place to push. Like that's only thing going in my head.
Right. It's not ideal, but it doesn't have to be like something that if you are, mentally prepared enough, like you can stay in the place, which is what you did. And there were like, at least probably 10 people in the room because of all the just in cases. Like, and we were able to just stay in the zone. I'm like, okay, Lauren, like focus. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's breathe. Let's, move
and like you were focusing me in. My husband's like pacing around the OR room. Like we were just trying. Exactly.
It was quick, and she came out and she was healthy and it was amazing. And, there was so much, I think like the other thing too is like you were also able to change the narrative for those providers and those nurses, because so many of them had never seen that before.
Exactly.
And so they got to witness something for the first time that they had never seen before, because most people just go with the C-section because they don't have a provider, or they might just be nervous, or that's just not their preference, and that's okay too. But I'm just so happy that like you will be able to forever share this story with other mamas who have breech babies, because this is not impossible. You do need to obviously put some other things in place and make sure that you have the right birth team and all those things.
There's a lot of check boxes you have to do, but if you're doing them and you're really analyzing everything, then it's feasible, right? And because of that, because I checked every box, I wasn't willing to just like automatically do a C-section, right? Because I was like, well, there's all of these things are working for me. Why don't I exhaust other options before just doing that one, right? So,
exactly. I love it. So do you have any like advice? I know you shared a lot of it already, but maybe like one or two things that you're like, if you're a breech mom, like here's some advice or encouragement for you, or if your baby's breech right now, here's some encouragement or things to consider, or what you might do differently or do for your second baby.
I mean, I think like it's tricky because of the baby's ability to turn. Like I mentioned earlier, if you are 36, it doesn't hurt to make a few phone calls. Doesn't mean that the baby won't flip. But just to kind of have that on your back burner, right? Doing your research, like you've done interviews with Dr. Stu. Dr. Elliott is another great one to follow. He does a documentary called Heads Up. But just like informing yourself about breech, there's breech Facebook groups, right, where you can get other resources from moms. So I think just like educating yourself is super key on that. And then I mean, just make a plan and stick to it, right? I think you have to, that's kind of the key. I think I made a plan, but I was just so far in deep that I never even looked the other way. And so you hear the stories, but I think when you're in it, it's like, it's much different. But I'm just encouraging all moms, like, you have options. And I
Yeah.
think even in my case, I mean, I was so far extreme that even if I couldn't provide her, like I was willing to travel. Like I was willing to do anything to make sure, you know, and I
Yep.
know that's a little extreme, but like just encouraging moms, like maybe you're not in a big area, maybe you're in a more rural location, but like you have options, and
You do.
you can ask for a second opinion. You don't,
Yep.
I had doctors personally tell me that it was tomfoolery to do what I was doing as a first time mom, because first time moms have, with a head down, have difficulty pushing, right? And so, but for me, it was like I did my research, and then it was also my own self-determination. Like I was determined, right? And so, but just listening to your gut and knowing what you are capable of
Yep.
is so much more valuable than, and the person who told me that wasn't trained in breech, right? So I think it's just so much more valuable to like really stick to your guns and your research, to make those decisions,
Yeah.
and that will really push you more so than all of the noise, because the noise is big. So
Yep. I
yeah.
love it. Oh my gosh, thank
Yeah.
you so much. So y'all, I really hope that this was helpful and encouraging and inspiring, because Lauren, you did an absolute amazing job, and you literally are like the epitome of, when we talk about mental preparation and being educated for birth, like this is what it looks like.
Yeah.
And you know, even if, right, even if the birth story would have ended differently, right? Even
Mm-hmm.
if we would have exhausted all of our options and then ended in a C-section, right?
Yeah.
You exhausted all of your options. Like
Mm-hmm.
you did everything that was within your
And I was okay with
control,
that. Mm-hmm.
and you're okay with that. And it's okay, even though the birth plan may not go as planned. And that's okay too. It's just also like we should be the ones, as the
Mm-hmm.
women, the birthing women, we should be the ones that are making that decision,
Yeah.
right? Like not somebody doesn't always have to make that decision for us. So
Exactly.
anyways, thank you
Yes.
so
I
much.
love it.
Y'all,
It
this
was
is saved.
amazing.
Yes, it was amazing. Y'all continue to, you know, Lauren has shared her story here. I
Mm-hmm.
know she has shared it also on her page.
Yeah.
You know,
And
so
any
also,
mamas can reach out to me with questions. Like
yes,
I just love, you know, I had friends reach out who had similar situations, and I just love sharing the story. And, you know, there's a lot of people going through it. And so we have each other to kind of as resources, right? So
exactly. I love it. Thank you so much.
of
Thank
course.
you, y'all. Show her some love, you know, share this, because more people need to hear this. So this will be saved. Make sure to check it out. Also, the course is open for enrollment right now until Sunday, so make sure that you check that out as well. Um,
Super helpful.
everything that Lauren learned is in there. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, all of these things play a role in no matter what type of birth experience that you're going to have. So thank you so much. I will give you
Of
back to your
course.
beautiful Lily now.
Yes.
And we will talk soon. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thanks.
Bye. Have a good
Bye.
day.